Chatima Tova. This is my talk for Nidre 2022-5783. That's called But I Can Do This. Though many of you are aware of the long-standing Temple Shalom tradition of relating everything to baseball, we also know that by far the most popular sport in America is football. So I'll start with a football story, describing how it came to be that the last time and I mean my, Green Bay Packers were in the Super Bowl. I was watching the game sitting at a bar under the U-Bahn tracks at this underground tavern in eastern Berlin. In Berlin, the Super Bowl starts well after midnight and goes, of course, for something like 4 hours, so it'll surprise few of you that as a rabbi and as a married father of 3, I rarely find myself in taverns from midnight till almost dawn in major European capitals. Part of the situation, I can explain away by the fact that it's fun to watch your team in the Super Bowl. Doesn't happen all that often, and I didn't want to miss it. It's been 11 years since then, so staying up late was worth it. But the Berlin part, I was invited to participate in a program sponsored by the German government for young rabbis to visit Berlin and see how German society was responding generations after the Holocaust. One, that means that 11 years ago, I was a young rabbi, though honestly, even then, they had to fudge the numbers to make me qualify. And 2, I did feel a bit guilty about spending the time watching a football game at a bar, while on a trip designed to teach about the aftermath of the Shoah. But it's not like I was skipping any educational programming in the midnight to 5 a.m. slot. Then, 3, the recent Ken Burns film, The U.S. and the Holocaust, brought some memories back. About a dozen other rabbis and I visited sites of Jewish interests in and around Berlin, both historical, where Jewish life used to be, and current, where it's being reborn. We visited shuls and scholars, memorials and museums, and one day a group of rabbis visited Sachsenhausen, the closest concentration camp to Berlin. Concentration camps are distinct from extermination camps, and one has to travel far from Berlin to visit the latter, though of course the horror is barely imaginable anywhere. We learned about the forced labor, the torture, the people imprisoned there because they politically opposed the regime or because they were deemed biologically inferior by Nazis, Jews, Sinti, Roma, anyone socially undesirable, criminals, developmentally disabled people, gay people. These crimes are well documented and the stories are well told. The day that we visited was appropriately miserable at Sachsenhausen, freezing, the wind cutting through our winter clothing. Especially effective was our guide, though I have to say he looked like an old Saturday Night Live caricature of what, as teenagers, we obnoxiously called Eurotrash. Thin man, hip, with an unusually styled black shirt with zippers randomly placed around it. But we know to look past appearances, and he was good at his job. Information he gave was not just chilling in its details, it was chilling in its delivery. He told us of the horrors of the camp with great empathy. He told us from the perspective of the camp inmates, but occasionally using the terminology of the perpetrators, more fully giving us a feel for the sardonic cruelty of the inhuman machinations of the camp's former masters. I expect a guide at any historical site to be knowledgeable about the place. But this man conveyed a feeling for not just the history, but also the moral and spiritual import of this windswept place. And so we spoke of the victims of the German regime of 33 to 45, the victims of the Soviets who took over the camp and used it to their own ends after the war, and of the assault on memory of an arson attack on the Jewish barracks in 1992, 30 years ago last week, the work of a neo-Nazi responding to a visit to the camp by then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha. As we prepared to leave, a colleague of mine said that he too felt our guide availed himself well of the notably difficult task of a German guide showing a dozen rabbis a concentration camp. So we asked him, how do you manage to show the requisite honesty with such emotional skill? And our guide paused, looked at the ground, then back up at us, and said, my grandfather was a guard here, he said. I cannot change that, so I do this. My grandfather was a guard here. I cannot change that, so I do this. It's one of the less expected lessons one can take from Sachsenhausen, but significant nonetheless. It speaks to a certain historical reality and a certain human reality. We're not the creators of the world we inhabit. We did little to develop the language, develop the society. As individuals, we do not construct the infrastructure that defines our lives. The social mores and technologies that define our lives are not of our making, just as the wars, conflicts, diseases, and injustices that precede our birth are not entirely our fault either. And we are responsible for how we respond to the realities that are not our fault. We are responsible not for who our grandparents were, but for what we do with the world they left for us. When we think of our ancestors, we're not thinking of history as most horrible criminals, lahavdil, shadowed with many burdens, but Baruch Hashem, that is not one of them. So a different responsibility, but still responsibility. Often, we hear of ordinary people who in extraordinary times did extraordinary things. That's a message behind so many stories of heroism, both of brave Jews and righteous Gentiles who risked their lives for what was right during a time of moral chaos. I'm inspired by such stories, but my world is different from theirs. So I tell this story because here was a man who, in ordinary times, in our time, chose to make an extraordinary decision, to accept not the guilt that belongs to others, but the responsibility that is our own, responsibility that our world places on us. Like the man said, I cannot change that, but I can do this. That's a clear purpose this day. We just said it once silently to ourselves, and we'll say it again yet tonight, a total of 10 times over the course of Yom Kippur. She'ein anachnu azef anim, she'ei oref l'mar lefanecha adnai l'heinu v'lei avotenu. Tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, aval anachnu v'avotenu chatanu. We are not so insolent or stubborn to say before you, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, that we are tzadikim, or righteous people who never sin, for we, like our ancestors, have sinned. Part of the liberating power of Yom Kippur is confessing that we're not perfect, that no person is, and that to admit what we've done wrong and where we look to improve. It's a statement of ownership over our lives, a statement that we take responsibility for our actions, our lack of actions, our misdeeds, as well as our good deeds. We're asked to take responsibility, regardless of the fact that we're imperfect beings born into an imperfect world. That just means that it's up to us to admit it and to commit to doing better, to have the confidence that we're worthy of forgiveness, and to forgive others who sincerely ask to mend their ways. This is a core message of Jewish life. Life is God's call to responsibility, wrote Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. We're obligated to improve ourselves and to improve the world. We're to do so because our actions matter. Our actions matter to ourselves, to those around us, to the world, and to God. Our choices matter. It's easy to forget this when we think of the massive, seemingly insoluble problems in our world. Our own decisions seem like less than a drop in the ocean. Despair, however, is not the Jewish option. We continue to assert, as we have for thousands of years, that every action, like every life, is significant. Time and again, the world tries to convince us otherwise, and time and again we reassert our belief that we can make the world better than it would be without us. We can make the world better because we can make ourselves better. Life is God's call to responsibility. We're to pick up and do what we can. As the sages said 2,000 years ago, Lo alechem l'cha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin li v'atel mimena. You're not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. It's an echo of, I cannot change that, but I can do this. But I know the language we use here in shul doesn't resonate with everyone. If you're unable to believe in God, then believe in your power to change the world. If you're unable to believe in your power to change the world, then believe in your power to change yourself. If you're unable to believe that you have the power to change yourself, then know that I, and for thousands of years our people, believe that you have that power, that we all have the power to change our lives for the better and to live up to the responsibilities that our generation bears. We can live our lives in such a way that we show the world that people can change for the better, that we can represent the kindness, the justice, and the godliness that our tradition and our history call on us to act on today. We're not changing the past, but we address it every day. not just the knowledge of what happened to the victims of fascism, though that too. We live in a world of war, of injustice, of unequal opportunities, when we all know that equal opportunity is the hallmark of any just society. We cannot change yesterday's pollution levels, but we can address tomorrow's. We cannot repair every community, but we can build our own and those around us. And by doing that, we make ourselves able to help others. Do not imagine that we can repair the world without repairing ourselves first. I cannot change that, but I can do this. That's for 100 generations, the hallmark of this Day of Atonement. It claims us in the covenantal embrace. To know, I cannot change that, but I can do this. But it's not just God that places responsibility upon you. It's not just the Jewish tradition that asks this of us. It's the man who said, my grandfather was a guard here. I can't change that, so I can do this. If he is capable of creating a life that responds to the responsibilities that are his lot, but not his fault, then you and I are capable of no less. This is not a dorm room question. What would you do if faced by Nazis? This is the real question. What do you do with the world we've inherited? I was not born to a family starving in South Sudan, or crushed by poverty in Haiti, or suffering under autocrats in Iran, or under Putin's sway, or in a neighborhood where bullets fly as part of the daily forecast. Few of us were. So what are we going to do with the gift we were given of how we live? How we're going to live? What will you do when you walk out that door tonight? Who will you be? A person who rises to the moment, who acts as if the world is worth saving, and that each of us have the power to help do it? Will we be people who, at the end of what I hope will be long lives, are able to look back with pride at how we rose to the challenges of our time? Or will we be, sadly, less than that? Return to avoiding the question. The choice is yours, and the responsibility is ours. Speaking of tshuva, of return, the Packers have not returned to the Super Bowl since back then, though they've gotten close a few times. I haven't logged the hours of midnight to 5 a.m. at a bar since then either. And as you might guess, I haven't really gotten that close. I do, every day, though, carry with me the lesson from that man who settled with the horrible truth that his family life was built on the ashes of the innocent. Take ownership of your position in history. Take responsibility, not just for your own happiness or for your immediate family, but for the well-being of our community and the world around you. We, too, have responsibilities placed on us by our memory, our ancestors, our biological or spiritual forebears. And it's not about just nostalgia or guilt. Nostalgia does not obligate us. It is the call that echoes from our encounter with the divine, to care for the stranger and the vulnerable, to proudly carry our distinctive practices and history and sense of commandedness and our words and actions that can change our lives and others' lives for the better. Not because we fear the grandfather, but because we see clearly the grandson. I cannot change that, but I can do this. You have one life. Live a life that you can look at and be proud of. Use this day to plan how to make our community, our corner of the world better, because you were here. Because on Yom Kippur, we are commanded to pick up our lives and make them worthy of the blessings of life, of health, of freedom, of obligation. Worthy of those who came before us. Worthy of those who will follow us. Worthy of the divine spirit that is within us. You cannot change the past, but you know what you can do. Life is God's call to responsibility. Gemar Chatima Tova. May you be sealed for a year of good, prosperity, of health, and of heeding the divine call. Gemar Chatima Tova.